Hi, thanks so much for joining us today. Hopefully you've got your coffee or your lunch and you are here for Dragonblade Authors Unplugged. With us today we have Anna St. Clair and C.H. Admirand. And we're also going to talk about Sandra Suku's book, which released this week. She's unable to be with us today, but we've got some tidbits that she sent over about her book. So let's get started. Thanks so much for joining us. So the first release we had this week was Sandra's book. I'm going to hold that for a bit, and we'll talk about that as we get going. But I'd like to start with Anna St. Clair's release, which was The Earl of Excess, which is book one in a brand new series, The Rakes of Mayhem. So I'm really curious about what your inspiration was for the story and a little bit about what the story is about and the series as well. Can you tell us?
Sure. Actually, I wrote for The Lion's Den. That was the first book I wrote with Dragonblade. It was Lion's Prey. And within that book came the prequel to this series, because I wrote the hero in that book meets and gets together with the sister of a friend. And so as I was developing these friends, I realized that it would be kind of cool to have a group of boys that knew each other at Eton and grew up together, played pranks together, stuck together, and became lifelong friends. And so I named them. One is the Earl of Excess, the Marquis of Mischief, and the Duke of So I'm looking over, I've got this picture on my wall to make sure I don't screw up the titles, because I do that all the time. So those are the three. And then there is the Earl of Clarendon, who was the hero in Lion's Prey. So that's kind of the foursome within this, but the three books are the novels. Sorry, my husband will get that downstairs.
That's okay. Dogs and phones and kids and grandkids are just fine.
They just want me to renew my auto thing.
Warranty.
The warranty. Yes, that's what it's all about. Anyhow, but I'm excited about this book because The Earl of Excess is a book about a young man who is one of Britain's coveted sons. He is a son of an earl, and he takes off, and this is running parallel at the same time, pretty much, with Lion's Prey. So he's missing, and he's over in America. They don't know where. He's fighting the War of 1812, so it caused me to have to dive into the War of 1812 and learn things that we didn't learn, but I really enjoyed learning. And he is on the battlefield, Battle of New Orleans. That's where the story starts. And he ends up, he ends up under a pile of bodies, because that's, it's what they do. Yes, what they do, what they did was they would stack the bodies. They would take the regimentals off of the soldiers. This is kind of, should I go here? They take the regimentals off, and they would pile the bodies that were dead on top of each other. And he just started out at the bottom, and he just stayed. So he was still alive. He had taken a shot and was mumbling help. And the heroine of the story, she and her little dog, Dandy, were out gathering herbs, and they had special permission to do this with this plantation, which is where the battle took place. They were out gathering herbs, and the battle started. It was like 6 a.m, and the battle started. They thought they would get home before all this happened, and they didn't have any clue that was what was up there for the day. So they got stuck and had to hide. And when the battle was over with, the dog heard these, and they had to wait for these men to stop pillaging the bodies, because they were ripping off the regimentals and stacking bodies. And so they waited until they thought they had the coast clear. They go in, they find Matthew, who is at the bottom of the pile, and they drag him out, this young girl and her dog, and try to figure out a way to save him. Now, she's when General Jackson was around, and she was terrified that if she got caught with a British soldier, let alone a British officer, that she would be hung for treason, because he had the whole area was under military rule at the time, trying to get things straight and win the war. And so she has a little skiff that she had tied up to a dock, and in New Orleans there's lots of these channels in the bayou. So she had her little boat, so she makes it over there. He helps her because he's not totally unconscious, and he's blind. So she gets him into the boat, and she and her dog paddle the boat away when they get a chance. and get him back to her cabin. She happens to be a healer, having learned this from her grandmother, who has gone to be with her aunt right now, who needed her. So she's all alone with this soldier who can't see, and she's trying to save his life. And that's kind of the premise of the story.
Those are some pretty high stakes.
Yeah, very high stakes.
Yes.
It sounds great.
Thank you. So she's got it coming and going at all ends. There's deserters because, people obviously sign up for something they think with a lot of bravado, and they get in the middle of it and the shots get fired, they run. And that's what happens. And just so much going on that she decides that it's not safe there. And so the adventure begins when she takes off for her grandmother, to find her grandmother at her aunt's. And so they have to traverse the bayou. And if you've ever been in the bayous, it's kind of interesting. I went fishing in there once, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. So, and I tried to write some of that into the book. It was fascinating. But that's the book. And so they have, it's enemies to lovers or forced proximity, and they become friends, and then they become dependent and love and the whole thing. And they do have a happily ever after. But that's the book.
Oh, good.
Did I answer all your questions?
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. I was really curious when I saw the setup for it that it took place in New Orleans, because that was kind of unexpected and something that I like reading about. So, and I don't know anything about the War of 1812. So we can talk about that when we talk a little bit later about research. But Colleen, your most recent release was Tempering the Viscount's Envy.
Yep.
Is that right? And that's the Lords of Vice series. That's book 3 in what's going to be a 4-book series. Is that correct?
2 books, right. And then a Connected comes next. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that one? That's me this time.
Actually, it's the Christmas novella that I turned in. That's going to be in Star of Wonder.
Oh, cool.
It's a hero who's unlikely. He lost an eye and basically doesn't have all the use of his one arm. He was wounded at the Battle of Trafalgar. So, but he works for the Duke of Windermere. So I thought, you know what, he deserves a chance. Yeah. He's, but he made a promise to one of his friends that was in the Navy that if anything happened to him, because his friend was married and he had a little 2-year-old, if anything happens, please look after my wife. So he has been doing that from afar, but over the last 10 years, he's really fallen in love with her. And but he keeps his distance because he doesn't want to encroach, and just stuff happens. It's Christmas time. But anyway, it's a promise kept, a love unspoken. So I really fell in love with him, Captain Coventry. But so that's the one. But then I have another series that I'm working on too. So a new series, a spinoff, which is really exciting too. But my head's a little jumbled because I'm also writing a novella for the Lion's Den, and they're all kind of due now.
So how do you keep stories straight? Do you work on one at a time, or do you jump around? Or
I have a lot of notes. I do jump around. It depends on who talks to me in the morning. Yesterday, it was Patrick O'Malley, who's part of the Duke's Guard, and he's like, you really need to give me a break and start writing my story. And I'm like, well, no, not yet. So it's hard. It's hard because I have characters from 26 years ago that still talk to me. It's a strange place to be in my mind. My kids got used to it because I would be talking like they were real, and they're like, "Oh my God, you have a friend, Margaret Mary Flaherty? Isn't that like your great grandmother's name?" I'm like, "Yes, it's also a character in a book." And they're like, "Okay, Mom." But they humored me, and they helped me out when I was trying to set up a scene. It really pays to have men around you when you're trying to do a fight scene and you have a tiny little heroine. So I'd have my husband over here, my 2 other sons over here, and I'm like, okay, now what would happen to my heroine who's a little shorter than me if somebody was like, she steps in the middle of a fight and they're throwing a punch or it's an uppercut or wherever. And I'm like, oh no, wait, but don't, because it would come like really close. And I'm like, don't need to really hit me. But so you kind of get, I got a lot of use out of that over the years, staging battles and things. which is helpful. But sorry, that's probably not what you asked me.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. So, Anna, do you work on more than one story at a time, or are you linear with your process?
No, I'm nothing about me is linear. So I I've tried to do a couple. It gets real hairy. I had going when I finished the second book for the series. I was writing another one at the same time, trying to juggle the back and forth. And where it gets really hard is trying consistency, because it's like CH said, you start hearing, there's something, a pull that makes you start writing on one book, and you put this one down and go to the next one because you don't want to lose that idea or that focus.
Yeah.
But then you go back and it's like 3 days and you're going, oh. And so I've had to develop systems. I've had to develop systems to use to kind of go back and forth so I can, the last chapter, I'll remember everything and I can go back and I've got a chapter out. I'm a pantser. So I don't have things, like I said, nothing really linear, nothing out there, but I develop it kind of in hindsight. As I go, I do. Here's my character book. I was going to say, this is my character notebook. All my stories have my characters that are in here. So I keep up with them that way.
So do you start with the character or do you start with the plot? What catches you first usually?
This is going to be a real strange answer, but I just start typing.
Those are the best ones. I love those.
I just start typing and this will come. It's like this person's sitting there drinking his brandy, or he's, getting ready to have a duel or something. Just it starts there, and it does that with every single book I've written. If I try to do it, the ones I've tried to do anthologies, like I just finished one for an anthology for Christmas, and we had kind of a prescribed this or that to put into it, like they do at the Lion's Den. That to me was a little bit harder because then it's like your imagination move over a bit and you have to focus into these parameters. So that makes it a little bit more difficult for me.
So you both have written for the Lion's Den or are writing for the Lion's Den series, which is a really interesting premise in and of itself. What is it like to write within in an already existing world? Is that different than when you're plotting your own series, or is it something that's come naturally to either of you?
I think it comes natural, but I don't want to take CH's spot. Go ahead. I was going to say, once I got into it and once I got the characters going, it all just kind of spilled forth. It just kind of came forward. And now I'm getting another one for the Lion's Den for next year. And I'm excited to do that because I understand who, the Black Widow is. And at least from my perspective, I understand her. And I've got a better idea. I spent a lot of time looking at that sheet of paper with all the stuff on it.
Yeah.
Last time.
I love that you can read them out of order, though. We don't even number them when we put them up, so that you can work through the connected world in whatever way you want to. When does your Lion's Den book come out, CH?
I have to deliver it by December. I think it comes out in February.
Okay.
So
when you're 2022. Yes.
And I'm grateful that they had that really detailed sheet of paper. But now I'm thinking, do I have to work? I'm trying to keep the Black Widow's details to a minimum because I have no idea hair color, eye color, figure, or anything like that. So I don't have time to read when I'm on double deadline. So my thought was, maybe I should just ask. And I'm like, well, maybe I could just not delve there and be more into the story itself, which once I figured out why the hero and the heroine are each at the Lion's Den, then the pieces are starting to fall into place. And he was being very heroic at the moment, and I'm like, I have to be here. So my military captain is like, I'm waiting to punch someone, CH. And I'm like, okay, sorry. But
so do you pants too, or do you plot more?
For the longest time, like the first 25 years, that's all I did was follow a synopsis. And my characters would fight with me. And gradually I learned that the story was so much better when I let them have their way. And with this series, stuff happened in my life and it was a little out of control. So I became a pantser for this series. And I'm like, that book wasn't too bad. So for the next two, I've kind of done it that way, and it seems to be working. So we'll see if I can continue that way. I mean, the characters always have something they want to tell me, and it's not what I want them to do. But it's like life. My kids never.
But you're the boss, you know.
You think you're the boss. I'm not the boss. My characters are. But there's nothing I can do.
So do either of you get that unsettled feeling you have when you're sitting down to write and you've gotten through the part that you know and you're heading into the part that you're not so sure about, and you have to kind of live in that place where you're waiting for the story to unfold? Or do you feel pretty secure when you're writing that you know where you're going next?
I generally know where I'm headed. I always know the ending of the story. I just don't know how I'm getting there sometimes. So in the situation that you described, what I do is I go back and read the first couple chapters and then the last chapter where I'm at, and it will kind of help me come up with things that I hadn't thought of, or ideas on different directions. Which I like a lot of adventure in my story. So there's a lot of plots and twists.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things, to have action and adventure, because it's, otherwise it's just life, and people are like, I want to escape from my life. But I do try to I do have an idea of where it's going. But like I said, then the characters interrupt and say, no, I'm not doing that right now. And then I'm like, okay. But I do know where they're going, and I haven't had too many moments where I'm looking at the blank screen like, oh crap. Because I shouldn't say that. I'll get up and go make a pot of coffee, let the dogs out, let the dogs in. We do this all day long. I'm in, I'm out. It drives me crazy. But yeah, sometimes it's harder than others. I mean, this like I said, this last series was in a difficult time in my life. So I'm just thinking, maybe it's time to change how I write. So I've been doing that too, which may not be a good thing. I don't know. I'll have to find out what people think of the books. Maybe it was a bad idea. We'll find out, won't we, Evelyn?
I don't think so. I don't think it was a bad idea at all. So you talked about having a hero who was injured. Sandra's book that came out this week is The Heart of the Storm, which is book two in the Storm Brothers series. And one of the things that she did was she had a hero who was in a wheelchair. She said that the inspiration for the book came from a picture that she saw on Pinterest. It's a drawing of a woman sitting of a man sitting in a wheelchair and a woman sitting on his lap, and that was the inspiration for the Heart of the Storm book. Have you ever written characters that have physical challenges or mental challenges that make it challenging for them to get to their happily ever after?
Mm-hmm.
I had a heroine that was confined to a bath chair, and she that was in Romancing the Wallflower, and so she was forced to go to all the dances, and she would sit in her chair. It wasn't always that way. She had a horse accident, and that's what landed her in the chair. So it was kind of interesting to have the hero and the heroine, hook up together.
Mm-hmm. One of my contemporaries, I have a U.S. Marshal who's injured in a gunfight. It's a contemporary, but anyway, bad guys, good guys. He gets caught, and because of the number of shots he took to the side of his body, he's in intense recovery, and he's not walking at the moment. And he, because when you have a job like that, it's all about being physical and being able to do your job. And he's like at a complete and total loss. And he kind of puts off the heroine who he met like 9 months before. And then, they kind of lost touch, and she's thinking, he wrote me off. And he's like, I really should have said something to her. And stuff happens, and they end up and he doesn't want her to know that he can't walk. So I have him in a wheelchair, but then not when she sees him for the first time. He contrives with the men around him. He's getting up on horseback, and he's on a horse when he sees her. So she still doesn't know. So, I mean, it's how he finally bears the truth to her that kind of like they get together anyway. But, it's not easy to write. And I've written characters with PTSD. One was from when he was in the service, and another one as a firefighter. So there's all kinds of different things. You know, when you think about it, so many people deal with so much, but they hide it. It's like in themselves. Like you try to keep all those emotions like tucked in because you think, oh, who wants to hear them? Because everybody has their, you know, as well. I was going to say it, not nice words, so I'm not going to say that. But everybody has their, you know, what in life to deal with.
Stuff to deal with.
Yes, we
Stuff
do.
to deal with.
There you
Yes,
go. Stuff.
Yeah, Sandra talked a little bit about that too when she was talking about her hero, and he has brothers, and trying to find what his place is going to be in the world, especially in a historical where people's places are so structured. You know, like what does it mean now to be physically impaired in a way that makes your positioning in the family different than it would have been before? You know, it's like dealing with that, and then trying to find a connection with the heroine, I think is a really challenging, really interesting idea. She talked about plotting her books and doing outlines and stuff too. So I think she comes at it a little bit differently than you guys do. Yeah. So you talked a little bit, Anna, about the War of 1812. What kind of research do both of you do before you start your historicals? What do you pay attention to? Is there something particularly that catches you, food or clothing or social customs or something like that?
With me in New Orleans at that time, there were so many different cultures going on. So I dove into all of that, trying to figure that out. And the Creole culture, and within the Creole culture, there's several different, there's the French Canadian, and then there's the Haitian, and it was, so it was a conglomeration, and then just down home Southern, and and having, what made it a little bit easier for me was having some friends in New Orleans, and having, like I said earlier, that experience of going fishing in the bayou at 6 in the morning. That was, it helped a lot on all of that. Probably the hardest research was around the battle, to understand, because I wanted my hero and heroine to get out of New Orleans and have it follow, a credible map for the way that the war was going, because actually the war was over when this battle was fought. That was something that was startling. They'd already signed a peace treaty a month earlier. So all these people died. Yeah. And actually, while the Americans, there was one of the 2 or 3 biggest battles that the Americans managed to win. And it was done, it was horrible for the British, but the British were actually poised to annihilate our shipping. They had already shut down our economy, and we were forced to, the federal bank was forced to pay by loans. It was borrowing from France and everywhere else to pay loans so that we could keep the government going. So they actually were at a point of crippling us when word came right before they were getting ready to bombard Alabama that the war was over. They had a copy of the peace treaty at that point. So that was kind of a saving grace, but it was just a lot of details like that. The route that they would have taken was so complex, because I needed to just figure that out in the bayou. It's kind of a lot of stuff. And then my hero was blind. So working with a blind hero and being sensitive to being descriptive for the book, and trying to describe where they are through different avenues, and using different senses. So that was a really big challenge, and it kept me on my toes. But I've read some reviews, and I'm really tickled that people are so excited about, they feel like they've been transformed to the bayou, which makes me feel good, because it means that I did my job in describing the area, and it's not just a bunch of talking words on a page. So,
richer descriptions, because you had to pull from different places to do it. You couldn't just rely on what your hero and heroine saw. So
right, a lot of hearing, a lot of smell, a lot of because we always hear that when one sense goes, the other ones pick up and they become stronger. Right. What I've read, it almost happens immediately. So that's kind of what I traded on.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's an interesting point. That it takes over that quickly.
Yeah, that does. I mean, because you're just kind of like, picture yourself stuck in darkness, and then you're in your room, and you start listening more acutely when you're walking around, or start your feet are touching things, and your sensitivity on where you becomes more heightened.
It makes sense. It would all be survival instinct kind of stuff that would kick in when you lose. So, did you do any special research for the Lords of Ice series or any of those books?
Actually, yeah, I have research that I've done in the past too, though, because I've written Regencies before. So I have my favorite research books, which I had to pull back out again to reacquaint myself with, like, the finer details. I have one book that's called An Elegant Madness. I think Venetia Murray is the author of that book. I can't tell you how long ago I bought it. It was a while. But they have interesting tidbits and conversations, and it's for me, I need to know, like, not just like what they ate and everything. I like to know, like, what were the like the cures at the time, like for ailments, and how they treated things, sanitary conditions, like in hospitals and things like that. But the conveyances were tough. Getting the differences between a town coach and a state coach, and all the different size, make sure you have the number of wheels right, the number of horses right. The biggest thing that stumped me in the second book was I had my characters going to London, and it was like overnight, and they were in the district. I'm like, oh my God. And so I'm sending a note to Scott, and I'm like, oh my God, Scott, wait, I made a really big mistake. He's like, okay, just fix it. But I had to use word problems to figure it out. At the time, my husband was still alive, so I'm like, okay, math is not my wheelhouse. He's like, all right. So, we took it down. How far could a horse go in a given day? How many miles? How many miles would the coaches typically travel going from one stage stop to the next? Did they have a change of horse? I had to figure out the changes of horse. By the time that was done, I'm like, I'm never using math in another book that I write. And for this one, I had to do percentages and percentage rates in 18.
Percentages of what?
Interest.
Oh,
bank account. Because it has to do with the character in the Lion's Den book I'm writing. She has an inheritance that she can't touch, but she could draw on the interest, but she had to share the interest with her guardian. So it's very, I don't know why I made it that complex. They were like, this is what we're doing, Colleen. I'm like, okay. So anyway.
It's interesting how much research goes in behind the books, things that you need to know as the author that don't necessarily have to show up in the book, but you have to know it because otherwise you'll work yourself into a corner you can't get out of.
Yep. Or people will
or like when you're describing a room and you're wanting to use a certain fabric.
Right.
You have to make sure that fabric was around at that time.
Yep.
And colors.
Yep.
Colors weren't necessarily all around.
Nope. The colors were different too. It's interesting.
Is there anything particularly interesting you come across in your research? Anything that you think we wouldn't know about the way people dressed or what they ate or social customs that couldn't be broken that we would not consider to be a big deal today?
I think about the food. It was interesting that maybe not so much in the Regency period, but when I was writing medievals, the poorer you were, the healthier you were, because you ate what you grew. Like you had more vegetables than meats and these fancy, toppings or gravies or whatever that they were making at the time with the spices that they had. And salting meat, to keep it as a preservative. And I use that to a hero's detriment in one of my books. They didn't soak it before they cooked it and gave it to him and his men. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But, stuff like that I found was really, really interesting. And a recipe for mead. I loved that. Of course, I don't know where I'm going to get this much honey, like a ton of honey. And then where am I going to keep it that the dogs won't find it? Like, woo, look what I found, Mom. Yeah. But,
So we have somebody asking.
I'm sorry.
Do your dogs like honey?
They like anything that is not dog food.
You kind of can't blame them for that,
No. Yeah.
We have a reader ask if you've ever had a reader call out any inaccuracies that you may have written. Have you ever had anybody catch you on details that you got wrong?
Yes. I had one that they thought I had gotten wrong that they called out on a review, which I wish that, you always wish that they would message you and let you know so you can at least talk to them about it. But they called out, it was back to the fabric, they called out a kind of fabric that I had used in my book as not being available at that time when I had specifically done research on it, and it was available. So, but I want, you're not going to argue with them. You're just going to let it go. So yes. But then I have a lot of beta readers that will call out things to me, that will send a note to me, and it's really nice. Then I can go back and fix it before the book gets published. So
I was going to say, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do make plenty of mistakes. I don't remember any research ones, but like I forget, and I have my characters somewhere and I never finish the thread. I drop threads more than I don't know. I've had some interesting reviews that I look at them, I'm like, oh, that's an interesting point. Thank you for bringing that up and saying it to myself. But I don't know. I don't know.
Sandra's really deliberate in her process. When she wrote about how she writes, she goes through a bunch of iterations before she actually gets the first draft done. So her first draft is really more like a third draft.
Oh.
So I'm imagining that there's lots of detail catching that happens before it gets to the end.
This is what I use. I go, as I write my chapters, I have like chapter 8, or chapter 9, day 15 or day 6, because that's always back to your math thing. That's always so hard to keep up with throughout the book. So I track out as I go. Like I said, I'm a pantser, so I don't have this plotted out. But as I go, I label the days so that I can keep up with where I am. The week, if it's been a sun night or whatever it's been, or other points that I have to bring up.
Yeah. That could be tricky, especially if something happens like in a series and someone is expecting, and then a couple of books later, it's like, well, is she still pregnant? Is she an elephant?
Big
yeah. God help us. But it's always, it's a good idea to keep track. I have a series Bible that I created, and I'm like, this is going to be great. I never had one before. And someone had suggested it when I started this series, and I was like, okay. But I have like a composition notebook, and I started writing in. I would write down the day, how many words I had written, what my goal is, how many chapters, and making sure that I alternate between the hero and heroine's point of views so that they kind of get equal time. I don't want to have too much on one character and then the other, unless they're really angry with me because they didn't get to finish what they wanted to say. But so I have those, and then I like paperclip them and go back like for the word problems, because for all the other books I need to know how long does it take them to get from London to the Lake District, or from London down to Sussex or whatever. So I have to keep those and paperclip them. And then when I clean my office, oh my God, I lost that notebook. I thought I was gonna lose my mind. I'm sitting there, I'm crying, and the dogs are like, can we go outside now? And I'm like, yes, go outside. But yeah. Took me a while, but I found it. But a lot of angst.
So even as far as being able to keep track of things like hero and heroine eye color and hair color and things like that, and consistency from book to book. I know that Sandra talked about starting with the picture for the first book. Do you all have ideas or pictures in your head of what your heroes and heroines look through, or do you go looking for inspiration for what they look like?
I look for inspiration. I'll call readers sometimes and ask them to help me with with what they want a hero to look like. Or, one time for the Lion's Prey book, I hadn't have the story even mapped out in my head, and I threw the picture of it up on one of my author takeovers, and a savvy reader, she shot up this idea, and I actually used it. I wrote the whole book around it. She just said, this looks like somebody arguing over something, and I took it from there, and that's what the book, that's the whole cover. That was where
inspiration comes from.
It was great.
So we had someone ask if your characters ever surprised you by doing things you never would have planned for them. I know Colleen's characters too.
Yes. Actually, in the book that just came out, I was writing, I was on deadline, I was really not as far along as I was supposed to be, and all of a sudden I woke up that morning, I'm like, oh my God, he's fighting a duel. Why? And so I texted my friend, I said, he's fighting a duel. And she's like, why? I'm like, I don't know. So yeah, it's, I have moments like that where they do things they want to do, not what I want them to do.
Yes, in the book I just published, Earl of Excess, he's blind, of course, and I'm not going to spoil the story for anyone, but he ends up fighting an alligator blind.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
So
I
and it's entirely credible. And I had to really sit down because it's the hero in him. So I'll leave it there. But it actually could happen, actually. I mean, but because, you have to remember that when you have those senses that you lose your vision, you have muscle memory, you have all kinds of things. So it's not like somebody can't swim. It's like, in fact, I have, when I grew up, I had a blind friend who could water ski, and we would take him water skiing all the time.
Wow.
So, so lots that people can do that you just don't realize. So sometimes that calls to you and you just, what do you mean you're going to jump in the water? No, you're not. Crazy man.
Yeah.
So I know you talked about the beginning part of your book, Anna, having a dog in it, and I know some of your other books have dogs in them, and that you both have pets that you live with. Colleen, you said a couple times about taking the dogs out. What kind of pets do you have? What do you like to?
You mean in my stories or at home?
No, in your for real life.
I've had a lizard. I rescued a lizard from my sister's front steps, Amber, and it was brown. And I wasn't really familiar with what they do when they kind of buy out for the holiday or for the season. So I picked it up and took Izzy, and I named it Izzy, and I took it home. I put it in a little box, and I got it warm, and it turned green. It was a little anole. And so then I went, $100 later, we had terrarium parts to it, and that lizard lived. I fed Liz. I had her as you walked in the house. You could see Izzy, and she lived several years. In fact, my cat got her. She got out one time, and one of my got her and punctured her lung. Now they're only this big, so I took it to a vet. Took it to the vet, and he actually was a wildlife expert, and he gave it a little shot of antibiotic because he said she's got a punctured lung, and and it lived. She lived.
Oh my goodness!
Wow.
How about the cat?
The cats, I didn't punish them. They just doing what was natural.
They're doing what cats do.
They're just doing their cats
too. Yes, I took my dogs for a walk this morning, and this little mole, and it was a mole. It went flying across the road. Dogs took off after it. I had to grab them. So they were doing what the animals do. But I've got a cocker Shep who's 11. He just turned 11, and I've got Gracie, who's a rescue she's a Russell Terrier, and they have quite a bunch of personality. So I patterned Dandy after her, and Shep's been in my books too. So
nice.
Colleen, what about you?
I have 2 rescues at the moment, Jameson and Riley. Jameson's a black lab pit mix, and Riley is a German Shepherd something. I think
they're both big dogs.
Well, they're like medium sized because I don't know, black labs aren't always big like the yellow labs can be really big. They're like shorter and stocky and tend to overweight. So I have to work on that with them. But yeah, they're crazy. We have a fenced in backyard, so they get to like run amok, except where we fenced off years ago that we have an inner garden because we had a beagle at one time that was like, oh, mommy's planting. Let's go dig it up. And that used to drive me crazy. So we call it the inner sanctum. The dogs aren't allowed in there. So they stand with their face through the fence like, can I come in? I'm like, no, this is where the birds and the rabbits play. And they're like, we know. So they wanted to do their dog thing. And I'm like, please just don't kill or maim anything today. I can't take it. But puppies. And they've been in my book, so not these in my contemporary, but
taking inspiration where you can get it. So can both of you talk a little bit about what's coming up next for you? What are your next books that are releasing for Dragonblade?
I'm not sure when the fourth book is right now with my editor Scott. It's redirecting the Baron's Greed. That's the last story.
That's
So,
Lord of Ice.
Yep, the Lords of Ice, and then the Christmas novella comes out November 11th.
And that's in one of the 2 Dragonblade
Yep.
holiday collections, Star
Isn't it
Wonder and Star of
cool?
Light. Yeah, I know. The covers are beautiful for those too.
Oh my God, those covers
They're
are gorgeous.
so full.
Yep, I'm just so I had my sister looking at them. She's like, "Those are gorgeous. Look at their dress." I'm like, "Yes," because she used to be a designer, fashion designer. She was like, "Those are just, they really are beautiful, lush pictures." But then I have oh, she does. I have the next one that comes out in February then. So that's the next 3.
That's the Lion's Den.
The Lion's Den, yeah. Hopefully, my captain, which I think I have to change his last name. I'm not sure I really like it, so I got to work on it. I'm like, oh, no. It sounds too boring. So I have to work on that.
You have a little time yet.
Yeah.
Anna, what about you?
Book 2, The Marquis of Mischief, comes out in, I think it comes out in November. So it's,
and that's the second in the Rakes of Mayhem.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
right?
This one is one of the best friends of Matthew, and he works for the crown, and he's assigned to protect the Prince Regent, and he comes across, well, the heroine in the story overhears a plot to kill the Prince Regent, and he runs into her at a place that he's supposed to have been going to try to, they thought they had the person cornered that was doing all this or putting the word out that the prince was going to die, and she happens to be there just with a friend just to explore the museum, and overhears it all and shrinks up and tries, and just overwhelming, and so they get together, and he saves her there, just kind of a minor incident, and the story kind of moves through. It has a big surprise ending. The whole thing is a lot of twists and turns.
Surprise endings are good.
Yeah. A lot of surprise.
They're always fun. Well, ladies, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us this week. I really appreciate it. Colleen, I really appreciate you filling in. I hope that Sandra is having a lovely time celebrating her release today. We'll be back to see everybody next week. Same time, same place. This week's releases were Heart of a Storm by Sandra Succo, which is book 2 in the Storm Brothers series, at The Earl of Excess, which is book 1 in the Rakes of Mayhem series. I love the mayhem part. by Anna St. And C.H. Admirand's most recent release is Tempering the Viscount's Envy, which is book 3 in the Lords of Ice series. So I'll pop all the links in the comments so you all can go pick them up if you don't have them already, and be set up for a great weekend of Dragonblade reading. So thanks so much, ladies. Thanks so much.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.